Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today, we're continuing our 2025 update on how to find and buy your Great Loop boat. We're going to be covering the survey today with Scott Miller, who is an AGLCA sponsor. His business is Miller Marine Consulting, and we'll bring Scott in just a moment. But first, as always, I'd like to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Great Loop Yacht Sales, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. Scott, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Kim, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And as I said, Scott, you are with Miller Marine Consulting, an AGLCA sponsor. So we thank you for that support. And
Absolutely.
You are here today to tell us about what to expect when you're getting a pre-boat purchase survey. But to start off, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself in this career path.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I spent many years in the tech world, the last 21 with Microsoft as a general manager over one of the engineering teams out in Redmond, Washington. And when I ended that career, after about 3 months of retirement, I realized I'm not cut out to retire. I need to be doing something. I wanted to do something with my hands as liveaboard trawler boaters. I love boating. I just have a passion around it and all things boating. And I'd started doing a little bit of work with Steve Zimmerman on his yacht purchase program. And the favorite part of that program for me was the pre-inspections or the light surveys that we would do for customers. So I started doing surveying. I'm in my 5th year now, and it's going great. I love it. I do a couple surveys a week, 4 to 5 a month, I guess is probably an accurate count. And, would love to help AGLCA boaters with that pre-purchase survey as they're coming through the bay. I don't travel too much, but so this is a business that I started and I just love it.
Yeah, tell us about your own boat, because you mentioned you have a trawler.
We had a trawler. We had a 58 Katie Krogan that we sold just a couple years ago. We've now settled down in Cape Charles, so we're not cruising as much. We will get back to cruising. We're looking at finding our Great Loop boat maybe over the next year and starting that process. It's something that I think I need to get my wife 100% on board on. We have 3 small granddaughters and we spend a lot of time with them. And so just trying to figure out how we work that into the schedule.
Yeah, grandchildren are a big looper interruption.
Yes.
A very pleasant one, of course, but yeah, they tend to change the plans a bit.
They do.
Yes. Well, so, I think most people who are in the market to purchase a boat in 2025 are aware of the idea of a survey and that it's something that they should get. But I do hear from lots of buyers who plan to forego that because they think they know what to look for. Let's start with why a pre-purchase survey is really an important part of the boat buying process.
Yeah, no, great question. I would say buying a brokered boat, a boat not new, is very similar to buying a house. Similar to the survey is the home inspection. And I don't think many people would buy a house. And, let's be real, some of these boats are the same cost as a house. And so a lot of people, I don't think anyone would go into a home purchase and forego the home inspection. I think the second thing is, before I talk about some of the details and what you get, is, why would you? For spending, I would say typical purchase is probably well over 100,000. I know there's some boats that are less than that, but why would you not spend $500 or $1,000 to ensure your purchase is something, it's a sound purchase? And so I'd say the second thing there is insurance will likely not provide you that binder without a survey. And so we're at the point now where boat insurance is harder to get, financing is harder to get, and that survey goes a long way in ensuring to the lender and to the insurance agent that you're buying a sound boat.
Yeah, so important, especially because there could be some hidden things you may not know to look for.
That's
And kind
correct.
of on that note, I hear people, buyers caught by surprise by the idea that they should consider two surveyors, one for the hull and one for the engine. Um, Tell us why. Why are those two different surveyors, and why is it pretty uncommon to find one person who can do a good job on both of those things?
Yeah. So again, I think it goes back a little bit to the first question as well. That survey report is very detailed. I'll use a little visual aid here. This is a tool that I use to do the survey. All the buttons here at the top are the main buttons, and then all these below, which if I just scroll through, there's probably close to 1,000 items on here that is part of a survey. And so, like you said, someone going in saying, I know a lot about boats. And I felt like I did that too when I started surveying. I lived on a boat for 7 years. I've owned boats for 30 years. I do as much of the maintenance myself. So very good with my hands. I understood diesel engines. I understood generators. I understood electrical. I have certifications from ABYC and electrical and systems and standards and corrosion. But I'll tell you what, the things that I've learned the most are over the last 4.5 years by looking at hundreds of boats and going through those systems and comparing those to standards. So, to think that, someone coming into this knows everything, they may know a lot, and that's great. That will help them for years down the road. But to know what everything is based on the standards and the Code of Federal Regulations and the Coast Guard regulations, it is a lot. So, to the question around the hull survey versus the engine survey, and I know that's a surprise. I get asked that all the time. Can you just do the engines? And what I tell buyers is I can visually look at the engine. I can look at hoses and clamps and the engine and components. I can look for leaks. I can look at the belts. I can look at the engine mounts. But an engine surveyor, they're typically certified by the engine manufacturer because they also likely have a repair business. So they know things about the engine that I never get that deep into. They'll usually have a computer program where they can look at all the variables and all the highs and lows of how the engine's been operating over its lifetime. They can do compression tests. They can do run up and run down tests. So they'll give you a much more detailed review and inspection of those engines or that engine and the generator than a hull survey ever will be able to do. So again, back to spending a little bit of money to potentially save a lot. The engines are the most valuable part of that powerboat. A sailboat may be a little bit different, but it's still a sizable investment if you have to replace an engine right after you bought the boat. So definitely worth another $500 to $1,000, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, that's very helpful. You said something in there, Scott. You mentioned that some of the engine surveyors may also have a repair business. That's going to lead to a question about how do you find and select the right surveyors? Because if you got somebody that is unscrupulous, perhaps they're telling you something needs to be fixed because they have a repair business and they're looking for your
Yes.
business there. So it's really important also that you find somebody you can trust and somebody who's reputable. How do you recommend? And typically, as you said, you don't travel much. Sometimes surveyors do travel for surveys, but then the customer is paying for that as well. So it's pretty common to find a local surveyor, although there's nothing wrong with bringing somebody in from further away if you trust them. But we see it in the forum all the time where a member will ask, I'm having a survey done at Green Turtle Bay. Does anybody have any surveyor recommendations? So how do you find a surveyor in the area you're in?
Yeah, and I think a great link maybe to put somewhere on the AGLC website or in the forums is the SAMS and NAMS surveyor websites. So the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors and NAMS. NAMS does a little bit more commercial, but I have a NAMS membership as well, and I do yachts and small craft as part of that organization, as well as SAMS. But these are the organizations that have invested a lot of time, a lot of money in the training and continuing education requirements to ensure that the surveyors that sign up and become part of those organizations are getting the right training, and there's an ethics component to that. And we have to have so many ethics credits every year to be part of that. And a lot of that training around ethics is that question exactly. So if I had a repair business, I would never survey a boat and open myself up to also do repairs on that boat. So having a standard, I think is very important. So for engine surveyors that do have a repair business, they're also listed in SAM's and NAM's website. You can go and select diesel engines and look at all the lists that it gives you for engine surveyors for diesel in that area that you're in. And a lot of times, they'll tell you, look, these are the things that are wrong with it, but I'm not going to do the repair if I find that, because it does create a little bit of a conflict of interest.
Right. And that's excellent. I did not know that there was an ethics component to the SAMs and NAMs training and requirements. So I'm glad
Yes.
to hear that. So as again, part of that selecting the surveyor, because it is so important, how do you respond when a buyer calls you as their potential surveyor? Is it typical to give references? Is it typical to show a sample survey report from a different boat? What do you expect people to ask you when they call you to see if you can do their
Yeah.
boat?
No, great question. A lot of them, they say, hey, I'm trying to figure out, if you're the right guy, tell me a little bit about yourself. And so, typically I'll tell them, what I do for the survey. But I think the big thing is I work for the buyer, and surveyors doing a pre-purchase inspection. We also call that a condition and valuation survey, because that's really what we're doing. We're trying to ascertain the condition of the boat and all its components and get a valuation. But to do that, I would say that the only person I work for is the buyer. A lot of times brokers and sellers will just kind of hover over you as you're doing that survey, and they'll try to explain why something doesn't work, or why something's there, or oh, they're going to fix that as soon as the survey is over. And I politely say, look, I'm working for the buyer, and I'm here to observe and report. If I observe a navigational light not working, then it's not working. It doesn't mean that tomorrow it can't be working, but for my report on the day that I survey, I'm observing and reporting what I see, and I'm basing the findings on the standards. So those are Coast Guard standards and regulations, CFRs, that's Code of Federal Regulations, and then ABYC guidelines and standards there. So that's, I think, why and how a buyer should select surveyors is ask, what they base their findings on. Who are they working for? What their experience is. Absolutely, someone can call around, and when they call me and they find out, I've been surveying less than 5 years, so 4.5 years now, and they may think, wow, he doesn't have a lot of experience. I can go find someone doing it for 30 years. And if that's what makes them feel comfortable, that's what they should do. So having a list of questions about experience and references, and like you said, a sample survey report is very helpful. And it kind of creates that standard in itself, because, and I did a recent survey for a looper up in Stevensville, Maryland, and he had asked for a survey sample, and it was interesting. My report, he said, yeah, this is exactly like the sample you gave me, so I really appreciate that. And it makes it easy when you use a reporting tool like I do, to just fire off a sample report. And that's, again, that's the guidance and the template that I'm using for all my reports. So I think those are probably the key questions I would ask.
Okay. And you've mentioned a little bit, Scott, about costs of the survey. And of course, the budget for looper boats is anywhere from, maybe $25,000 up to $1 million, probably even beyond those limits sometimes. What is the actual survey cost? And it's not based on the purchase price of the boat either.
Right. Yeah, definitely not based on the purchase price. I think sometimes that may be good for a surveyor, but
Hmm.
and there's really no standard cost. And as I got into this business, I even found that a little frustrating because I'm trying to be fair to customers and also make money.
Hmm.
But there's no survey for SAMs and NAMs. They don't say, this should be the price. What I can tell you is costs vary based on the boat size because this is where you're going to spend the time. The type of boat, the model, the number of features, options, components. If a boat has generator and water maker and fuel polishers and all these other systems, it takes more time to test those. What I look to do in a survey is not just flip the power on, but I try to demonstrate that system. For a water maker, I'll go as far as running the water maker and testing the water with a TDR meter to make sure that the membranes are good. So
Hmm.
these things take extra time. And so what I do when I do talk to a customer that hasn't selected me yet, they ask that, it always will come down to price a lot of times. And I say, look, here's how I price it, boat size, and I do a price per foot. And I have a range in that price per foot that might be anywhere from 20 an hour, 20 a foot to 30 a foot. 30 is my top. So for a 40-foot boat, you're looking at anywhere from, $900 to $1,200. But it really is around, those features and the complexity of the boat and then the size of the boat. One more thing, you will find some surveyors that just have a flat rate, $1,500 or $1,200, whether the boat's a 25-foot center console or a 60-foot trawler that has a bunch of different systems. So they try to make it easy. They put the price on their website. But, I kind of feel like, for the smaller boats or the less complex boats, they're not getting as good a deal. And then the only other thing I charge for is travel time if it's more than an hour. And I usually do like a $25 an hour charge. So it's a minimal charge. But being around the bay, if anyone's traveled around, it's about a 600-mile loop. It can take, and I'm in Cape Charles on the Eastern Shore, so I can get to all the main areas, at least around here, within an hour. But if someone asked me to drive up to Annapolis, that's a 3.5 hour drive for me. So, it's a 4 in the morning start and a 6, 7 p.m. end of day for me.
Yeah, and I think for members who maybe have unfortunately been through more than one survey for different boats they're looking to purchase, and they're just not fitting the bill. I think you'll find that that per foot rate or the per foot range also varies greatly geographically. So keep that in mind, for
Yes.
those of you, there's certain areas of the country where everything's just more expensive. So keep that in mind as well. Let's take
Yeah.
a quick break. We'll play a message from a sponsor. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about, the actual survey day and what happens after that. So we'll be back in a moment. Made in the USA for over 50 years, Aerotech Laboratories, or ATL for short, manufactures fully collapsible, on-deck, range extension auxiliary fuel bladder tanks that are available in standard configurations from 25 to 500 gallons. These lightweight fuel bladders are constructed from a rugged mil-spec nylon reinforced coated fabric and are compatible with both gasoline and diesel. ATL fuel bladders provide invaluable peace of mind when traveling long distances and are trusted by thousands of captains and crews worldwide. Go farther safely with ATL fuel bladders. Learn more and shop online at atlfuelbladders.com. Cutterman Marine Services is a vessel relocation and delivery service owned and operated by retired and former members of the U.S. Coast Guard. They have crews ready to exceed your expectations wherever your vessel is located. In addition to relocation and delivery services, they offer a host of other marine services such as new owner training. Check out their website at www.cuttermanllc.com or call 855-65-BOATS. You have a lot invested in your boat. Why would you trust it to someone other than the Cutterman? Cutterman Marine Services. Professional, knowledgeable, capable, experienced. We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. Today, my guest is Scott Miller of Miller Marine Consulting. We are talking about the pre-boat purchase survey, which is such an important step. This is part of our 2025 update on the process of finding and buying your Great Loop boat. And if you are enjoying this conversation, and if you enjoyed the one we had with Cindy Lewis on financing, upcoming, we have got Great Loop Yacht Sales talking about how to find and buy the boat and what the process of doing that looks like. And we've got John Horton talking about insurance. So all of the components. And if you are in the market for a boat in 2025, our Looper Lifestyle Seminar is coming up in Chattanooga in late March. Registration is now open on our website. And thanks to sponsorship from Great Loop Yacht Sales, there is a boat buying process. So these same 4 speakers that we have invited to this podcast series will be there live in Chattanooga to present seminars on this exact process. So the Looper Lifestyle Seminar in total is 2 days, March 30th. Nope, sorry, I believe it's March 28th and 29th. The first half day is a free half day, thanks to Great Loop Yacht Sales on the boat buying process. And then we'll dive into planning for your own Great Loop adventure. So check out those details on the greatloop.org website. Just go to the events tab and you'll find it there. Scott, let's jump back into this conversation.
Okay.
As you mentioned on the type of survey we're talking about today, you represent solely the buyer. That said, there's a seller behind the scenes. You know, what's something as a surveyor that the seller ought to do to be ready for the day of the survey?
Yeah, that is a great question. You know, and sometimes I'll actually get a call from the seller and say, hey, what can I do to help you? And I'm like, oh, I am glad you asked. Step one, clean the boat. I am going to be crawling around in every single hole that I can get into, and I love it when the boat is clean. Actually, one of my findings, it's a lower level finding. So if you think of survey findings as A for safety and code violations or compliance issues, B being things you should fix immediate, C being kind of notes and, you know, things that cosmetic stuff like that. I will actually tell the buyer, this boat is dirty. And I'll say it a little bit different than that, but say the bilges are not clean and dry. There's muck or junk in the bilge. So having a clean boat not only shows me that you care, it shows the buyer that you care. And so take some time. And really that's all it costs is your time to clean that boat. I'm not asking you to compound and wax. I mean, certainly you should do that, you know, on a periodic basis, but have it clean. The next thing is, if you have a bunch of things stored in the hatches that I'm going to climb into to inspect pumps and through hulls and seacocks and all these things, clean all that stuff out, remove it, put it in storage. If it conveys with the boat, then just find a place for it that doesn't block my entry into the hatches. And then, you know, this should really have been number one. Update your safety equipment. That means flares. That means fire extinguishers. If they're older than 12 years, they're no good. They may still work, so you can keep them, but they're not in compliance with the regulation. Make sure you have working CO and smoke detectors. If you have a fixed fire suppression system, unless it's deactivated or decommissioned, it has to be inspected annually. So get it inspected. Have those things ready for when the surveyor comes on, and things will go a lot more smoother. And then the only other thing, you know, I want to look at all the documentation for the boat. So if it's Coast Guard documented, it's state registered, if there's owner's manuals that have the specifications of the boat, I mean, I can get those online, but if all that's right there, I take pictures and I just keep on moving. So to have, you know, things like that all ready to go, a seller can make the survey go a lot quicker and smoother.
Excellent points. So walk us through the survey. And I know it's a many hours process, so I don't mean in extreme detail. You know, you kind of mentioned that it's not great for the seller and the seller's broker to be leaning over your shoulder. You know, what about the buyer? And just kind of walk us through how the day works.
Yeah, and you know, that's another good thing too. That the things that I give to the buyer have a little sheet that I pass out I'll usually email to the buyer, just, how to prepare for survey day. I like to start early. If I could get on every boat at 7 a.m., I would, but a lot of brokers and owners, you don't want to be there that early. But I like to start early. And I usually tell the buyer, bring as few people as you need, not want. It's not a boat ride. It's not, this thing that you bring your uncle and cousins to because they also have a boat and they can help you. No, you hired me to help you. Bring yourself, bring your partner, if they're part of the boat buying. Because the more people we have, the more I'm moving people out of the way all day. And so it just makes it a little bit easier, because I have a process. I showed you the tool I use. I start on the left and I work across and I work across and I just don't want to miss anything. So I'll answer any question the buyer has through the day. But sometimes I'll say, hey, when I get to that component or that system or that area, let's talk about it then. And so just understanding they should be looking around the boat in detail. If they've already done a walkthrough, survey day should be a day that they start opening up lockers, opening up hatches, looking at things in detail as well, and then just write some notes. And then as I get to, certain points in the day, I'll say, okay, what have you found so far? And then we can talk about that. But typically it starts 8 a.m. I come in to a boat and I take as many pictures as I can at that time. And usually they're the far out pictures, the high level pictures, and then I'll start doing more details. I'll inspect safety items, documentation, and then what I like to do, even though the buyer might have an engine surveyor, I'll also do a thorough visual inspection of the engines and all the mechanicals in the mechanical room, in the engine rooms or engine compartments. And because I'm looking at it really different than an engine surveyor. I'm looking at it, one, from a yachts and small craft surveyor, but also as a boat owner. And I know what buyers should be looking at in terms of maintenance, or more likely deferred maintenance, maintenance that hasn't been done that should have been done. And so I like to look at all those spaces before we do a haul out and a sea trial, and then the temperature's up over 140 degrees in there. So I do that when it's nice and cool. I do it in the morning when there's not a lot of crowds on the boat, and I can go through and just kind of run through my process. So like from 8 to 10, that's what I'm doing. At 10 to 11 o'clock, I usually try to have the haul out scheduled, and we take the boat over to the lift, and then we do the underwater or the out of water inspection. And we're going to look at all the running gear. We're going to look at the paint, the coatings. We're going to look for scratches. We're going to look for scars. We're going to look for previous groundings and any damage that's caused. We'll look at through hulls and anything underwater. We'll look at the anodes and we'll try to determine if there's an issue with corrosion and on all those things. Well, then that usually takes an hour, the out of water inspection. We drop the boat back in. It usually gets a power wash if it's not perfectly clean, just because we want to do a sea trial with no excuses, so to speak of. A lot of times, if you try to do it before, the seller or the listing broker will say, well, we could get up to speed, or it would get up to wide open throttle if the bottom was clean and it's a little dirty, so that's probably what it is. Well, we're going to remove that as part of the equation. We're going to have a clean bottom, clean running gear. We put the boat back in and then do the trial run. During the trial run, that usually takes about an hour, and we're going to do speed tests at different RPMs. I'm going to look at the engine load, engine temperature, oil pressure. We'll look at making sure that it's coming up to the RPMs, looking at fuel burn, and we'll look at wide open throttle. And this is another area, Kim, that comes into contention a lot. A lot of brokers and owners will say, I don't run this boat at wide open throttle. And I'm like, well, I'm not asking you to run it. I'm just asking you, let's see if it can do it. We'll stay there for a minute. We'll look at temperatures, to make sure, the engines are functioning as designed by the manufacturer. And
Right.
that's so important. If the boat won't come up to RPM, there's something wrong. And, if the owner or the broker won't do it, I just tell them, look, I represent the buyer, and I'm going to put in my report that the boat did not meet performance standards.
Mhm.
And I said, or you can run it up and let's see what happens. So the buyer should not back off of that requirement. It's not that they're going to run it wide open throttle all the time. It's not efficient, but it's not harmful to the boat. That's the important thing that everyone should understand. So, I can usually talk through the issues with the owner and the broker, and we'll get good on that. But then we'll do a back down test, make sure the engine mounts are good, and steering test from one side to the other, test all the electronics, horns, autopilot, all that good stuff. And then we're usually back to the dock, and I usually need anywhere from 3 to 4 more hours to go through all of the things on my list. And I usually finish up, if I can start at 8, I'll usually finish up between around 3 to 4 p.m., I guess. Sometimes sooner, sometimes a little bit longer. It just depends on, the day and if we were held up at the lift or anything like that.
Yeah. So obviously an extensive review of the boat and all of its systems.
It is.
What happens after that? We've talked a few times about your report. So set some expectations there about how long it takes to, kind of process all of that information you've figured out. So when should they expect a report typically? And I know that can vary, but, generally just an expectation on how long it might take to get that report. And then also, I often hear the boat failed survey, which I understand is really kind of not a thing. You'll point out the problems. But so tell us about that part of, the report. What's really in there that the buyer is going to want to know?
Yeah, great. And I'll first start with how long it takes to deliver a report. This is almost as variable as the price, but I have a standard. I try to do it without question within 48 hours of the survey being done. A lot of times I can get that within 24 hours, but I let the buyer know that day of survey because I know my schedule then. If I don't have surveys back to back, I can usually get their report done the next day. And it's because I'm collecting some data up front through the listing broker and through the listing itself. And so what I'm annotating during the survey are the issues, are the findings. And then really when I get back to the house, I'm filling in the details. I'm inserting pictures with the findings and, doing a detailed review of the 300 to 400 pictures I've taken to make sure that I've caught everything that I've kind of indicated to the buyer of the condition of the boat. And so, I would say, what the buyer should look for if I'm doing it is their report back within 1 to 2 days. The beginning of the report will be a bunch of disclaimers. Believe it or not, the surveying business is very litigious. So there's a lot of disclaimers like, here's what I did, here's my scope of work, but I didn't do these things. I didn't use tools to take apart walls or engines or electrical components to see, if there was anything wrong. So those types of things. It'll have the general vessel information, scope of work. Below that, it's kind of a detailed status of every item on the boat that could be inspected. And then all the mechanicals and stuff like that. And then at the end, a findings and recommendations section, as well as the valuation. And that valuation should have some type of market analysis as well, so that we can ensure, I'm just not saying, hey, based on Scott Miller's opinion, this boat's worth $200K when other boats are selling for $300K or $100K. So there's a good market analysis there as well.
And then it is up to the buyer to decide based on those findings and that value, whether to renegotiate parts of that or whether to proceed with the sale essentially. And I think we'll cover a lot of that with our yacht broker experts when we talk with them, because that kind of then goes back ball in their court to work with the buyer on, what of those findings is kind of normal wear and tear, so to speak, for the age of the boat and what is something that is renegotiable on the purchase price.
That's correct. And the rating that I give to the boat, the condition, whether it's, a fair or average or above average, that's based on the current condition at the time of survey. So that includes things working, things not working. I'll say it's average. And so and Kim, you made a good point, with, the next step is taking that report, working with your broker and your insurance company. And that broker a lot of times will say, if it's a buyer broker or even the listing broker will do this, because they're fair about this and they understand that, if there's things wrong with the boat that the buyer expected to be working, they may have to renegotiate. And so that first question you asked, why do a survey? Well, you don't really have a tool to negotiate or renegotiate based on your initial offer if you don't have a survey. So that's another good reason to get the survey.
When it's an older boat, we get a lot of questions, and let me be clear, newer boats also sometimes have issues. But on an older boat, let's say you have a lower budget, you find one that you think fits the bill. And in comparison, the survey can be a larger percentage of what you're laying out if the budget is lower. Are there any specific pitfalls if you're looking at older boats that maybe you can kind of weed out on the front end before a survey to make, like, let me not spend the $1,500 or whatever it's going to cost me to survey this boat because of X? And I know that's a really hard question, but anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, definitely. And this would also be a good question. I think you said John's doing the insurance
yes.
portion. Ask him this question too, because that is step one. If a buyer comes to me and said, hey, I'm looking at a 1980 Chris Craft or Hatteras, or, pick your make and model. The first thing I do is say, yes, I can do that survey, but before I do, I want you to talk to your insurance company. So I try to guide them, because they may go through a lot of insurance companies before they find one that will insure a boat more than 20, 25 years old. So that's step one. And they can get the hull ID from the broker and give the insurance company everything they need to, other than the survey report itself, as kind of a step one. Step two, if they're going to inspect that boat or do a walkthrough of that boat prior to, deciding on doing a survey, I usually give them a short list of, let's say, 8 to 10 things that they can look for. Some of those things being a soft deck. So as they walk around the boat, if there's any flexing, that's probably an indication that there's been some water intrusion in that area of the deck. Look for heavy corrosion on the external components, the engine components, motors. Look at the windlass underneath. Is that heavily corroded? They could look for leaks or stains around windows and portholes to see if seals are bad. They can look at the electrical if they open up some hatches and if it's a mess, or if the power cord going into the boat is warm or hot, even, that may be an indication that there's some loose wires or some high resistance somewhere in that boat. So I'd say using their eyes, they don't have to bring a bunch of tools. Using their eyes, they can kind of spot some of the things that may be wrong, but it doesn't mean don't go forward. I would just say it needs to be really a decision by them. How much of a tolerance do they have for imperfection? Because older boats, and this is a generalization, older boats will typically have more of these problems. They'll have more of the imperfections, the scars and the scratches of a long life. Just like people, things start to break down when they get to that, age 30, 40 years old, and they can just expect to maybe spend more money in maintenance. So they may spend 20, 30, 40, $50,000 less on the purchase price, but most of the time, they'll make up that gap over the years of the boat in maintenance and replacing failed components.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I see on a fairly regular basis on social media, and I always cringe just a little, is someone who is looking to buy a boat, and the seller, the broker, whoever it might be, has provided them with a survey that's less than a year old, whatever the circumstance may be. Maybe it's been a quick turnover, the person who's selling it just bought it, whatever it might be. There's this survey that they have been given access
Yeah.
to, that is often, maybe less than a year old, and they are choosing to rely on that rather than hiring their own surveyor. Is that ever a good idea?
Oh, it can be made to work.
Okay.
Is it a good idea? Is it as good as, having a surveyor come at the time you're buying the boat and to work directly with you and answer questions and share ideas? No. But, if you don't want to spend $1,000 to have that survey right up front, done right in front of you, and have really, when I survey, I tell my customers, I'm available now for you as long as you own the boat. If you have questions based on survey or just questions about this boat, call me.
Mhm.
Because I do know that, they're going to be, if they buy another boat, then they're going to think of me first. I mean, but I think that's a good thing to provide. So it's just kind of ongoing support for the survey. But if someone says, you know what, I just cannot justify spending $1,000, or I don't want to spend $1,000 on a survey, I'm being offered this survey less than a year old for $200 or whatever, or maybe it's free. The first thing I would suggest is they call that surveyor. I put all my contact information on every survey, and see if they will do an update to that survey. Maybe they have to come out again and do a quick inspection. No surveyor that's part of SAMS or NAMS will just sign it off with a new date. They want to come look to make sure what they're signing their name to is still valid. So if the survey is more than a day old, it's old. To me, anything could have happened to that boat after I leave it, and I can't say for sure if it's the same boat that I looked at a day before. So a surveyor may come out, and especially if it's within 30 days, they may say, look, for half price, I'll come refresh the survey. I'll do an inspection of everything just real quick, make sure nothing's changed. And I'll then give you a fresh survey. The other thing is, and these are things that a buyer can do. So the next thing I would do is call insurance. Hey, I have this survey that's a month old. I think it's good. I kind of looked it over and it looks good. I talked to the surveyor and he'll come validate that. Will you accept it if it's more than a month old? And some insurance will say no. You have to have a new survey before we, give you a binder, because we don't want to be at risk for that boat, not knowing the actual condition. So it can work, but it's a little bit more work than just taking a survey and emailing it to your insurance and saying we're done.
No, that's a great point. And insurance and financing, if you're using a financing company, you're probably going to have a lot to say about that. So certainly check with
Yes.
them. Scott, just as we wrap up, is there anything I have not asked you that, maybe something you wish that buyers knew about the process before they go ahead and bring in a surveyor?
I think the big thing is surveyors, these are the ones that I've worked with, and, I know just from networking and going to conferences. To me, and then I'll just speak from my own opinion.
Mhm.
I'm here to help the buyers find a boat and know what's wrong with it before they commit. So you mentioned, do we say pass fail? I never say pass fail. And I tell the buyer, look, I will be the unemotional, the unbiased component of this purchase process. The buyer's emotionally connected by the time I get there. They've pictured themselves, or actually taken pictures of themselves sitting on the
Right.
boat, laying in the beds, and they've already kind of started their great loop in their head with that boat in mind. And so I can come in and I tell them, look, I'm unbiased. I don't care if you buy the boat or not. I want what's best for them. And I want to make sure that they have all the information that they can have before they accept that vessel. Once you sign that acceptance document, you effectively own the boat, and you're committed. Your down payment is committed as well. So I would say, those are the big things to me.
Yeah. Scott, thank you for joining us. This has been really enlightening. I think we've done a lot today with your information towards really kind of educating people about the process and how they can recruit help in this process to look after their best interests. So Scott Miller with Miller Marine Consulting, thank you for today. We're looking forward to seeing you in Chattanooga in March.
Thanks, Kim. Looking forward to be there. Have a great day.
You as well. And to everyone who's watched or listened today, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.